Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks also for joining. People aren't keeping count like I am, but this is actually our 8th annual event for the Dahdaleh Global Health Intern Symposium. So thank you all for coming, and thank you all for volunteering to come and share your work. We're really excited to have everyone here. I'm Tara Penny. I'm the Interim Associate Director here at the Dahdaleh Institute for Global Health Research. This is one of my sort of favorite things to moderate over the year. So I'm just really excited to hear from everyone. We usually start with a land acknowledgement, so I'll do that now. York has a new land acknowledgement for folks that aren't sort of aware, and there's continuous dialogue around land acknowledgement. So I'm just going to read a couple of passages from the current land acknowledgement for us. So First Nations peoples have lived on this part of Turtle Island for millennia, stewarding the land, the water, and all that contributes to the life in this region. Today, the culture and presence of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples enrich the lands and people of this territory. York University campuses, of course, are located on the Toronto sort of lands and territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations and the lands of the Anishinaabe of the Williams Treaties First Nations. And our campuses, of course, are also situated on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee as well. The treaty history is foundational, and it is our collective responsibility to honor the land as we honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. We're grateful for the opportunity to be learning, working, and thriving on this land, and we commit to learn the truth and be active in the process of reconciliation. So just like to open up with a bit of a grounding in our place and York's place in our history and the legacy of Native peoples, First Nations peoples. So we have a really exciting lineup. We have 7 speakers, I think, total for today. And the day will be broken up into a couple of pieces. So we'll have a few presentations, and then we'll have a Q&A, so an opportunity for question and answer. So do, as people are presenting, think up comments, questions, queries you might have. And then we'll have an opportunity for that Q&A. We'll take a little break, and we'll come back, and we'll have another 3 presentations, and we'll sort of repeat the process, and then we'll have a recap at the end. Does that sound like a plan? Okay. And I think every individual has about 5 minutes. So your combined co-presentation has 10 minutes. And we're going to try to wrap up by about 1 o'clock. That sounds okay. Oops. Beautiful. Any questions before we get started? Any comments? Anything? Everyone's got water. Everything's good. Okay. Lovely. So to get started then, on our first presentation, so we have Hanna, who's online with us today. Hi, Hanna. Hanna is a global health student at York University. She supports research on youth engagement in global climate governance, focuses on claimed spaces where young people move from observers to active participants and secure their own roles and influences within climate activism. So really excited to hear from Hanna and what she's been up to over the past little bit. So Hanna, we'll hand that over to you to get started. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Penny. Thank you. I just want to thank Dr. Penny and DI and Natalie for allowing me to participate today. My name is Hanna, and I'm a global health student and a research intern at the Dahdaleh Institute. So the work I'll be presenting today is my contribution to a scoping review on youth engagement in climate governance, which focuses on how young people participate and perceive their role in shaping climate decision-making. Youth are among the groups that are most affected by climate change through their lived experiences and their concerns for the future, yet they're often excluded from formal governance processes and decision-making, which raises important questions about equity, representation, and power. So this project is part of a larger scoping review that is titled Mapping Youth Engagement in Climate Governance, and it examines how youth participate across different governance spaces. My role is specifically focused on claimed spaces, which are forms of participation that are created by youth themselves, such as protests, activism, and youth-led organizations like Fridays for Future, It is different from institutional or invited spaces such as the United Nations because they're created by youth often in response to exclusion from formal decision-making processes. So the distinction between the claimed and invited spaces comes from participation in power literature, and it's very important because it highlights that participation alone doesn't always carry influence. Through this review that we did, several key patterns have now emerged, and the review is still ongoing. The first is that many studies show that youth often turn to claimed spaces because they feel excluded from formal decision-making power. These spaces allow them to challenge existing power structures and create alternative patterns for engagement. And another central finding is that participation doesn't always translate into power. Even when youth are included in governance spaces, their influence over actual policy decisions is often limited, which raises concerns about tokenism. And third is that youth participation is strongly shaped by motivations and their lived experiences. So many young people are driven by direct experiences from climate change depending on where they live, as well as emotional responses like climate anxiety, urgency, and their concern for future generations. And finally is that participation has mixed outcomes. While it can foster empowerment, leadership, and provide youth with a sense of urgency, it can also lead to burnout, frustration, and emotional strain, especially over time when young people feel like their ongoing contributions are not leading to what to them is meaningful change. So to explore these patterns, we used a scoping review methodology, which is designed to map the breadth and diversity of the existing research on the topic. This involved systematically identifying and screening studies using covidence, moving from title and abstract screening to full text review and now on to data extraction. This approach allowed me to capture different forms of youth participation across different contexts and to identify key themes, patterns, and gaps in the literature. It is particularly useful in this area because research on youth climate participation is still emerging and is highly diverse depending on which country we're looking at. So what does this mean for global health and climate governance and youth involvement? This research shows that youth are already actively shaping climate discourse and action, but structural barriers continue to limit their ability to influence decisions nationally and globally, and their direct influence from what we've found remains local. This highlights a key tension, which is while youth participation is increasingly visible, it is not always formally impactful in terms of policy change. As a result, there's a need to move beyond tokenistic inclusion where youth are present but not given real decision-making power, and towards more equitable and meaningful forms of participation. It also shows how important it is to support youth-led and grassroots spaces where young people are often able to exercise greater agency and leadership. And at the same time, participation is not always equally accessible to youth depending on where they live. So addressing equity and structural barriers remains critical. Moving forward, the broader project, which is still ongoing, will compare the entirety of claimed and invited spaces to better understand where youth participation is most effective, how it can be made stronger to influence policy and governance outcomes. Thank you. And I'd also like to extend my deepest appreciation for the research team, Dr. Carrie Scott and Chelsea for working with me on this project, and Dr. Penny and the entire team at the Global Food and Health Systems Research for their amazing guidance throughout the process. I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of such a supportive and inspiring team. Thank you.
And thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much for that really great presentation. We can have a bigger Q&A as well, but was there any quick thoughts or comments you want to make to Hannah before we move on? Oh, yeah.
I have a question for you. Did you come across any challenges when you were screening or going through your data extraction?
Sorry, Jordan, do you mind repeating that? It got cut off.
No worries. So I'm asking if you have come across any challenges when you have done your screening or your data extraction.
Yeah, so during the screening process and data extraction, first of all, was very new to me. I learned them throughout this process. So being able to specifically first of all, distinguish between the claimed and invited spaces was a bit difficult for me. Sometimes it is a bit more obvious when it's youth that are invited to the UN or very formal spaces. But sometimes it was difficult in terms of something that was the youth had created a movement at school, but it was being funded by school, or the program was being led by their school, to be able to distinguish if that's really youth-led or not. Or sometimes if the youth were younger, on the younger side in middle school and early high school, if they were made to think that the movement that they had in their community or in their school was really led by them, or if it was controlled or more so managed by higher power structures. And also another a challenge that is still ongoing for me is kind of establishing what we mean by meaningful participation, because meaningful can mean different things. And obviously for the project, it is more focused on having formal policy change on a national level or a local level. But in terms of youth, if we're thinking of meaningful in terms of it empowers them, it gives them more information about climate change and what's going on, not even in their own country, because a lot of the movements are originated in high income countries, but it allows them to look into how this process is impacting youth in countries where they are very, like, the jobs of their parents or their future jobs is very dependent on climate change. And a lot of countries in the global south, a lot of the youth that are going to end up going into fishery or tourism, or a lot of the things that are going to be impacted by extreme temperatures, but they don't obviously have that kind of influence to speak out against them, or kind of have youth-led movements there. So I thought that was very interesting to kind of look more into what meaningful means from youth perspectives, and not what we think is formal policy change.
Thank you.
Great answer, Hannah. Okay, wonderful. So if you're happy, Hannah, then we'll move on to our second presentation. And so we have Mahnoosh and we have Yasmin, who will co-present for the next one. So Mahnoosh is an honored psychology undergrad at York University, specializing in applied methods and analysis. So she works as a research assistant across various labs, a focus on early neurodevelopment, eco-psychology, climate-related mental health, and it has experience in quantitative data analysis. And then Yasmin is a graduate of York University's Global Health Program, where she completed the specialized honors Bachelor of Science in Global Health with a focus on health policy management and systems. And her research focuses on environmental health and health equity, examining how structural and environmental factors shape health outcomes in vulnerable communities. You've contributed to projects exploring climate-related mental health as well, housing and energy insecurity, and One Health systems too. So thank you both so much for presenting, and we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Penny. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Yasmin, and alongside my colleague Mahnoosh, we'll be presenting our project titled Mapping Mediators and Moderators in the Relationship Between Extreme Heat Exposure and Mental Health in Low and Middle Income Countries.
My name is Mahnoosh, and I'm completing my specialized honors in psychology at York, and I'm a research assistant for Heatscape Africa project. And my focus and interest is on mental health, eco-psychology, and quantitative methods.
As for me, I'm a global health graduate from York University and a research assistant on the Heatscape Africa project. During my undergrad, I specialized in health policy management systems, where I developed a strong foundation in analyzing health systems, policy, and evidence to address complex global health challenges.
Climate change is driving rising temperatures and increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme heat events. And there is a growing evidence that heat exposure is linked to mental health outcomes, including like depression, anxiety, psychological distress, with disproportionate impacts in low and middle income countries, and of course, global South contexts due to higher structural and structural vulnerabilities. And as shown in the figure there, extreme heat affects mental health through intermediary mechanisms such as sleep disruption, psychological stress, cognitive impacts, and these relationships are further shaped by moderating factors, which includes gender, socioeconomic status, housing conditions, and occupational exposure, which influence who's affected and under what conditions. And this project is structured in 3 phases. By this project, I mean the Heatscape Africa project. There are 3 phases. The first one is understanding these pathways and mechanisms, which includes the scoping review that we're doing right now, an ethnographic study, a diagnostic accuracy and pilot studies, and a longitudinal study. And second is examining health system readiness. So this includes developing and pilot intervention. And lastly, integrating lived experiences to better contextualize these impacts, which includes lived experience engagement.
The scoping review has 3 main objectives. First, to map mediators that explain how extreme heat affects mental health. Second, to identify moderators that shape vulnerability in this pathway. And third, to assess how heat and mental health are measured across the literature. From our screening, several important gaps are emerging, which highlight a clear need for more targeted research. This includes limited LMIC focus and context-specific research, lack of culturally appropriate measurement tools, and very few studies that explicitly test the underlying mechanisms linking heat and mental health. There's also notable methodological inconsistency across the literature.
To address this gap, we conducted a scoping review following the JBI methodology, which is designed to systematically map existing evidence in complex and emerging research. We selected this approach because our goal is not to evaluate intervention differences, intervention effectiveness, but rather to identify, organize, and of course, conceptualize the range of mechanisms that links extreme heat to exposure to mental health outcomes. And we conducted a comprehensive search across several databases, which includes PubMed, Scopus, PsycInfo, Embase, CABI, and of course, Web of Science. Our inclusion criteria was guided by the PCC framework, so P, which stands for population. It included human populations exposed to environmental heat. So this includes elderly people, youth, and of course, women of reproductive age. And of course, concept, which includes mental health outcomes and the mechanisms linking heat exposure to those outcomes. And of course, context. So context includes low and middle income countries, LMICs, and global south settings. And a key component of our approach is the use of conceptual framework to distinguish between different types of these pathways. And specifically, we wanted to also describe what mediators and moderators are in the context of our scoping review. So mediators explain how heat exposure leads to mental health outcomes. And of course, moderators explain who is affected and under what conditions.
Currently, we are in the screening phase of our scoping review. We initially uploaded over 1,500 articles onto Zotero, which is a reference management tool. After removing 307 duplicates and excluding records with access issues where titles or abstracts were unavailable, we were left with 1,218 records to begin screening in Ryan. We then moved into title and abstract screening using our predefined inclusion and exclusion criteria. As we progressed, we made a conscious effort to strengthen consistency by revisiting previously excluded articles and refining our decisions through ongoing team discussions. We also introduced a labeling system to flag studies relevant to key concepts such as mediators, moderators, and measurement approaches, which will support later stages of the review. To further align our approach, we conducted joint screening sessions where we reviewed articles together, discussed decisions, and clarified any uncertainties. This helped improve consistency and reduce discrepancies across our screening process. Throughout this phase, we encountered several key challenges. These included interpreting findings across diverse studies, clearly distinguishing between mediators and moderators, refining our PCC framework, and developing a comprehensive search strategy through trial and error.
Okay, so we have seen a lot of several key mediating factors and pathways, and one of the most consistent pathways is sleep disruption. So exposure to high temperatures, particularly at night, has been shown to impair sleep quality and of course duration, which in return contributes to like emotional dysregulation, fatigue, and of course, increased vulnerability to anxiety and depression. Another important pathway is physiological stress, and heat exposure activates the body's stress response systems, including cortisol regulation and thermoregulation, which can lead to prolonged states of stress that negatively impact mental health. We also see evidence for cognitive and attentional impacts. Heat can impair concentration, decision-making, and of course, cognitive performance, which may reduce individuals' ability to cope effectively and increase irritability and psychological distress. Additionally, we also figured out that there was a perceived stress and emotional strain as emerging key mediators. And in many contexts, heat is not only just a physical experience, but it's also a psychological burden, especially when combined with the environmental uncertainty and limited access to resources. And lastly, the last mediating factor was coping and resilience mechanisms. So they play an important role during our search, and access to social support and adapting coping strategies and environmental resources may help buffer the effects of heat, and it highlights a potential for an intervention.
From our screening so far, key moderators and confounders are emerging in the relationship between extreme heat and mental health. Moderators are factors that change the strength or direction of this relationship, shaping who is most affected. These include pre-existing mental health conditions, age, socioeconomic status, housing conditions, medication use, gender, and occupation. Confounders, on the other hand, are associated with both heat exposure and mental health outcomes, which can distort the relationship between them. These include air pollution, humidity, socio-demographic characteristics, seasonal variation, and broader social and environmental conditions. Moderating and confounding factors often intersect, making effects difficult to isolate and highlighting the need for research that clearly distinguishes their roles.
Moving forward, the next phase of our project involves conducting a full-text screening, and then we will conduct a data extraction and chart key study characteristics, outcomes, mediators, moderators, and confounders. And after this, we will synthesize the evidence to identify patterns, key findings, and gaps in the literature. Finally, we will share the manuscript with co-authors for feedback and revisions, and hopefully finalize the manuscript and submit it for publication once it is fully refined.
So this work matters because extreme heat is not experienced equally, and neither are its mental health outcomes. By identifying mechanisms that explain how heat affects mental health and the factors that shape who is most vulnerable, we can move towards more targeted and equitable interventions. This is more critical in LMIC contexts where structural vulnerabilities and limited resources can amplify these risks. Ultimately, this research helps focus from broad associations to actionable insights and informing policies, interventions that are both context-specific and evidence-based, moving beyond whether extreme heat affects mental health to understanding how and for whom it affects is critical for developing equitable and effective climate health interventions.
Finally, we would like to thank and express our sincere gratitude to our co-authors and collaborators for their guidance and contributions. We also have a little contact information right there. So we have Dr. Benedict Welbong, Dr. Godfred Boateng, and Nell. You can reach out to them if you have any questions about the Heatscape Africa project. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Thank you so much. That was very clearly done. Diagrams are very helpful.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any quick thoughts? Yeah,
I
please.
just have a quick question. So I sort of want to understand the context in the sense that what all countries were you specifically focusing on? Because obviously every country, I understand that you were focused on low income and middle income countries, but they're all going to have different environments and, heat levels. So how are you segregating them? And is this going to be specifically, are the policies going to be based on each country specifically or just a region as a whole?
So this is actually part of a scoping review that we're conducting. So part of our context, we chose low and middle income countries and the global south just to represent and get as much data as we can when it comes to extreme heat, because we know that they're more prevalent in those countries. And so basically, by adding the global south and the low and middle income countries as our inclusion criteria, then we're able to do a scoping review and basically how do I explain this? But basically, we want to see what's out there, right? That's the point of a scoping review. So we wanted to limit it and keep it like more targeted towards like low and middle income countries because there's no really like research out there for that. One of the patterns we saw in our methodology was that we saw a lot of high income countries getting tested, specifically the US, China, and the UK. So we don't want to look at that because we're looking at a low and middle income country. Specifically, Ghana and Zimbabwe were the countries that we were focusing on in our protocol to begin with. So we really want to see what's out there for the low and middle income countries, specifically the global south, because we know those countries tend to be more hotter. Yeah. So by limiting our criteria to just low income and global south countries, we're able to really get all the information that we're looking for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and like we're also not limiting to a specific country or a few countries because there's not that many research on, like, for example, extreme heat like in India or like, for example, in other like low and middle income countries or global south countries. So we're getting a variety of countries that we're including in our study that includes like low and middle income and of course global south. And we haven't gotten to our data extraction yet, but we've run a pilot data extraction to sort of see if there's like any discrepancies and whatnot. And we do have like heat metrics so that we can see like exactly how in each of these countries, for example, if we have like different LMIC countries or global south countries, we exactly can see like what they're using as measurements. And of course, we sort of see like which country is experiencing more heat, but they ultimately do experience extreme heat. So we're just including them to get a big scope. If we really, because as like Yasmin said, if we narrowed it down to, for example, Ghana and Zimbabwe, which is like the greater project is covering, then we're not going to get enough papers because there's not enough papers on those two countries. Yeah. Hence, we're getting a broader scope. Yeah,
makes sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And sorry, Harvey, I did see you popped a hand up. Is it okay if we pick your question up in the Q&A just to give Gordane a chance to wrap up? Is that all right? Sorry, I opened this door, but
no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Harvey. I appreciate it. Lovely. So thank you so much. That and great question as well. Great responses. So let's hand over to Gordane. So Jordane's a global health student here at York and a graduate of the University of Toronto, where she completed a specialist in medical anthropology specialism. Her work focuses on how social and structural determinants such as housing, insecurity, and inequitable health systems shape disease patterns and clinical outcomes. So Gordane, let's hand it over to you. That'll be our last presentation. She's online, and then we can circle back to the topic and open it up for a broader discussion. Over to you, Gordane.
Thank you, Dr. Penny, for introducing me. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Gordane Calloo, and today I'll be presenting my peer-reviewed research titled Shelter to Survival, Unpacking the Health Impacts of Housing Insecurity Across the Life Course. And so this was conducted through the Dahdaleh Institute, specifically with the Global and Environmental Health Lab here at DI under the supervision of Dr. Boateng. So, housing insecurity is a global health challenge because it highlights the exacerbation of structural determinants. From here, we are able to see how policies in place disregard and also displace people. And so, for example, during COVID-19, when comparing global north, global south, and global east, we were able to see a clear difference in health infrastructures. From global governance to interprovincial policies, these systems create disproportionate health risks. And so housing insecurity, which includes unstable, unsafe, or unaffordable housing, is a growing global health issue. It impacts both the physical and mental health and disproportionately affects vulnerable populations. So, this research addresses a key gap where housing is often overlooked as a structural determinant of health. And so it invites readers, so the peer review paper invites readers to have an overview of housing insecurity and its health impacts, while employing a life course framework to better understand how these early housing exposures will then shape long-term health outcomes. And so importantly, it also introduces an interactive dynamic within the environmental, social, and biological conditions. And so my work focuses on how these effects are not isolated, but instead are cumulative and compounding over time. And so when we think about health, we often think about hospitals or healthcare systems, but one of the most powerful determinants is where people live. And so this determines their positionality within structural, community, and individual and interpersonal barriers, which on a micro level is influenced the conditions the individual has faced. Sorry, on a macro level has influenced the condition that an individual face. And so when considering the life course framework, we want to understand at each life stage how health is then exacerbated and materialized. So this process has developed. So the methodology that I used was through literature review. I did a rapid review. And so this process helped me develop skills in critical synthesis, data collection methods, and applying and interrogating the life course framework. And so I conducted a literature review of studies published up to 2025. I examined the relationship between housing insecurity and health across the life course. I utilized 4 major databases, utilizing key terms such as the Boolean operators of housing, health, and the different life stages. And from an initial pool of 125 articles, I applied the inclusion-exclusion criteria to identify studies that examined these measurable outcomes. And so the key findings show that housing insecurity is strongly associated with cumulative chronic health inequities. The exposure from early life, as we see in pregnancy and in childhood, can lead to long-term physical and mental health consequences. And so across the life course, housing insecurity is linked to an increased risk of chronic disease, as well as infectious disease, mental health, and reduced access to health care. And so importantly, these effects are cumulative over time. They are shaped by these broader structural factors, such as the socioeconomic status as well as policy. And overall, this highlights that housing insecurity is not just a social issue, but a critical public health concern. So these findings are important because they show that housing insecurity reinforces health inequities across a generation from perinatal to old age. There's also a structural component to interrogate when discussing housing insecurity or housing instability as part of a larger socio-political and upstream system, and the deleterious effects that health outcomes happen at more of the micro level. And we see this across the life stage by highlighting these really unique age operationalizations of how health is then materialized at each life stage. And so this highlights the need for integrated approaches that connect housing policy in collaboration with health systems. So moving forward, I hope to continue research within health equity and structural determinants, especially within clinical outcomes. This work really challenged me to think beyond just the individual explanations of health and instead critically examine how housing insecurity is produced and then how it's sustained through policy and structural inequities. I'd like to acknowledge the Global Health and Environmental Research Lab for their support throughout this process, and as well as my co-authors. I'd also like to thank Dr. Boateng for his mentorship over the past 2 years and his guidance throughout this and many other research projects. And I just want to thank Dahdaleh Institute for allowing me to be here and to share some of my research that I've done over the last semester. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gordane. Thank you so much for that really comprehensive overview of a really huge, challenging topic. So,
Yeah.
so maybe what we'll do is I'll just open up just to be similar. If there's anybody who has just like one quick question for Gordane, and then we can open up for the broader discussion before the break. Is there anyone with a comment question? Yeah.
I have a question for you. What do you think your scoping review could have an impact on like people who are experiencing like housing insecurity, and in terms of like also addressing like policies and whatnot?
So this was a rapid review. So within the rapid review, a really great incentive that came up was the first housing. It was like a first housing policy that within Victoria, BC, where they came up with a way to utilize like intercultural safety as well as policies in place to build a more safe and equitable housing environment. Even here in Toronto, we have the Duns House, which is a place within UHN that's led by, I believe, Dr. Bouzeri, where he's utilizing these frameworks within social medicine and being able to implement ways for less emergency visits and building an actual place where people can then live and thrive. And this also is really well for our healthcare system burden of patients that do come in. And then it also really gets to the point, the root of housing insecurity, which is just getting more people off the streets and getting them within a more safer environment.
Thank you so much.
No
Thank you.
problem.
Thank you so much. So very happy to open it up for a broader discussion. Feel free to put forward any questions you have from any of our excellent speakers from the first section. We could circle back to your question, Harvey, if you'd like to kick us off in this section.
Sure. First of all, congratulations. All three presentations were really excellent, fascinating, and so important topics. So I have a question with Mahnoosh and Yasmin. Unfortunately, the climate continues to get hotter and hotter and hotter. So we've been able to get some sense on the longitudinal kind of impact, comparing studies, say, 15 years ago versus more recent. There may be some longitudinal data in your studies. And I guess to add to that, academic research really only covers what was happening up to about 3, maybe 2 years ago. Are you looking into the gray literature, government reports, others that can get a handle of what's happening, this year with what's happening last year, particularly affecting mental health?
It's a really good question, Harvey. Thank you for the question. I think it's very important that we look into 15 years ago and comparing it to the present right now. We still have not taken a look at a lot of government reports or just reports that, for example, like NGOs and like other organizations that have released. Since we're looking at more of an empirical evidence, I did not come across like reports that had empirical evidence. I think maybe more that needs to be done in terms of searching for reports and like gray literature, but I did not come across like quality-based empirical evidence, because that is part of our inclusion, that we're looking at empirical evidence rather than just like commentaries, like scoping reviews and like systematic reviews. And yeah. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, but that will definitely be one of their next steps, because gray literature is very important. We'll be looking at that after completing our full text screening. But what's really interesting are, because you did mention that throughout the years, like we see that the climate is changing, and it's really interesting to see the different types of measurement tools and how like newer ones are emerging and how they're evolving. So we're really focused on like mediators, moderators, the measurement tools, and I feel like the empirical evidence that we've been getting from our non-gray literature is very helpful in doing that. And our gray literature is really just to give us more information on the climate and how it affects people living in those conditions. And thank you for your question.
Thank you. Hey, any other thoughts, questions from online? Comes up from Harvey. Yeah, I think you made it in just to and then very happy to go to the
Perfect. I had a question for Hanna. Hopefully, I guess I'll just say the question. I'm not sure. Okay.
You're looking to see if Hanna.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I can't scroll across now. I don't know. Can you tell Hanna? She's not.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Your presentation was really insightful. I had a quick question about your exclusion and inclusion criteria. When you were talking about like specific countries, you mentioned how a lot of like peer-led, youth-led spaces in the global south, like you can't really figure out information on them, or maybe they don't have the exact resources to create those spaces. I wanted to ask if like your research is just limited to physical spaces, or if you're also including like online spaces, because I feel like online spaces give a lot of resources to people who may not have like physical resources.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the inclusion criteria in like specifically for the spaces, we weren't looking to really evaluate online. We weren't going to focus on online. I mean, we did have, there was a lot of online spaces specifically during and following COVID, because a lot of the protests that were meant to be in person, they were then changed to online movements. So we did briefly focus on those, but we didn't want to focus too much on evaluating how it being online influences things, because then we would have been a little bit more sidetracked. So we were mostly focused on the attitudes that youth had towards the movements, like whether their movement was sustained or not because of how they felt it was influencing policy. We were mostly focused on primary studies where there was a clear link to governance, or at least they meant to clearly influence governance or decision making or policy, and also the studies that kind of captured youth perspectives. And then mine was for claimed spaces, so the spaces that youth had created for themselves. We also excluded specifically educational spaces, so any spaces that were meant to change policy but in an educational aspect, so change how climate change is taught to youth. So we didn't focus on those either. It was mostly like health policy.
Thank you.
I think I heard something Dimitria's hand up. Yeah.
Okay. I did put a hand up, so I was just putting it in the chat because I have to take off. But I just thought the work on housing was very interesting and something new, I think, for me to kind of hear about. I thought that was interesting. And I just wonder, because I know at York University, there's also the Observatory on Homelessness that's also working on housing issues. And I just wonder if there's ever been any collaboration with them, or if there's any way that this type of research could be shared with them to kind of inform their work.
No, but thank you for your question. That's such a great point. No, actually, it wasn't in collaboration with them. This was just with the Global Environmental Health Lab. This research was conducted, it began last summer, and then it was finished around December. So it kind of just came and left. But I think it would be really great to reach out to them. Sorry, what was their name? You mentioned
I'm just going to put them in the chat. It's just because I've seen them before, because they do a lot of KT. They're really very good, and they kind of bridge the research and advocacy space. So I think they'd be really interested in your work.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'll just take a look.
Well, thank you. That's a great suggestion. Benedict, you have a question?
Yes, let me get my mic. Thank you. Amazing presentations. I have questions for Hanna and Gordane, and then a general comment. Hanna, I was curious about the finding, or was it more of the background that you were given about participation not equating to power? Did you say participation and power did not? Do you have thoughts why how is that? How does that happen? It doesn't seem reasonable to me. But do you have thoughts on why participation doesn't necessarily equate to power or empowerment?
Yeah, thank you so much. It kind of goes back to when I was explaining my answer to another question where when we were looking for meaningful participation in the beginning, what we were thinking of meaningful was formal policy change. And when I said participation doesn't lead to equal power, especially when it comes to invited spaces. So being invited to UN or more formal institutions was because sometimes what it felt like was youth involvement was a little bit more symbolic rather than actually influence for them to actually influence policy change. And if we were to look at it, if we were to say that that would be meaningful participation, then we would say that participation doesn't always equal influence. But if we're talking about how it influences people's youth motivations or how having a community of like-minded individuals where they can learn from them and kind of influence other youth to speak up, if that would equal power, then we can think of it that way. But in terms of the scope of the study, where it was looking at how it specifically influences policy change, and if there has been any sort of national formal policy change that came from those youth-led spaces, we just at this point have not found any.
Thank you. And very quickly, if you don't mind, Tara, to Gordane. Gordane, I think you did say did you say it's a rapid review? I didn't got confused. Was it
Yes,
scoping a
it's
rapid review?
you're right,
So-
right. So, with it being a rapid review, there was a lot of, I believe I didn't bring up the limitations because I believe, I feel like you're going to
No,
begin
no,
on.
no. I just wanted to understand first before I even ask the question, because what I was going to ask may not. I was going to ask about whether you came across, even though it's rapid, but did you come across possible mechanisms for that relationship between house and insecurity and downstream health outcomes? Did you pick up what could explain that?
I believe a lot of the literature when it came to discussing housing insecurity and how it could, I guess, be neutralized, a lot of it situated within policy and being able to work within like policy affordability and then social protection. So, it was mainly that sort of literature that I came across. Because the way that I was doing the rapid review, because it's not a scoping review, I believe it wasn't systemic. And so I felt like there was a bit of bias. And I did mention this in the paper as well. There was a bit of bias towards the high income countries, being that it wasn't a systemic review. And so it was a bit more generalizable towards high income countries and things of that nature. But yeah, that's such a really good question to consider if there is any real like epidemiological connections, if that's what you meant. Um, if it's that in terms of biological, I did find a new study. It was based in 2024 about perinatal health and about an increase in cortisol levels within perinatal health. So when the baby is still in womb within the mother. So I found that really interesting. But that was only in 2024. So I think with housing insecurity, it's beginning to be a bit more popular in literature and in its discussion, especially around like the epidemiological outcomes that we're going to see, hopefully, in the next few years. Did that answer your question? Sorry, Dr. Obong.
Thank
Yes,
you guys.
yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Gordane as well. Any other questions? Yeah, today, please.
All right, thank you. Yasmin and Mahnoosh, that was a great presentation. I was just wondering, how did you define heat exposure? Did you have a specific definition for heat exposure in your review?
So we looked at whatever the literature classified as heat, we looked at. We just excluded any lab controlled heat studies. Other than that, everything was considered for ambient temperature and extreme heat. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Hey, thank you. And then Benedict, to your comment, I was just going to add, or your question around, and Hannah's work on sort of symbolic inclusion. There's some really neat papers on, I mean, there's kind of another word for that, I think. Tokenism is the other sort of accepted, I think, terminology for, you invite someone in, you gain their perspective, but they don't really have an ability to make the decision or push the decision forward. They're just sort of around the table for other reasons. So like symbolic inclusion or tokenism, I think, are all things that people that are in the governance world, it's important for them to think about so that we don't continue that or allow it, or if it is happening, to take every opportunity to correct it. I think it's just not as common that we think about it in terms of youth. So it's nice to hear, Hanna, you're thinking about that as another version potentially of tokenism and how we might be able to correct it. Yes, any other thoughts so far? Excellent. So I will propose then that we could take our break. Is everybody happy with that?
Yes.
So I think our return time is around noon, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, we could take this good 8 or so minute break. We'll reconvene at noon and then hear from our next couple of speakers. Sound like a plan? Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone. See you in 8 minutes or so. As to continue on, we've got another 3 amazing speakers to hear from. So we'll jump right in. So Esha is going to start us off in the second half. A second-year specialized honors global health student specializing in health promotion and disease prevention. So not unlike myself. Sure. Also involved on campus through multiple student clubs, including the role of Vice President of Humanity First YU, a nonprofit organization. So thank you for that volunteer contribution as well. Much appreciated. So I'll hand over to you. So look forward to hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Penny, for giving an introduction, and the Institute for giving me the opportunity to be a part of the symposium. As mentioned, over the course of the school year, I have had the opportunity to work as a global health special projects intern, where I worked alongside the administrative team. Shout out to Theresa, Natalie, Charlotte, and To. Over the course of this role, I have deepened my appreciation for administrative roles, as I understand that they play an important part in creating environments for learning, dialogue, and collaboration in global health. One of my major roles that I learned a lot from was supporting events held by the Institute, whether it be through weekly seminars or panel events. This involved providing administrative and logistical support for events. Supporting these events helped me understand how much planning goes into curating meaningful academic spaces. From helping with pre-event support, such as event outreach, to assisting at the registration desk and ensuring the logistics of the room were set up properly, I was able to see how these details contribute to whether an event runs smoothly and if our guests and attendees feel engaged and welcome. Through the events held on a larger scale, I helped to create intentional and culturally responsive spaces, which is very important in global health as it provides platforms for knowledge exchange, hearing from diverse voices and their lived experiences. These events highlighted a key principle in global health through collaboration across sectors, countries, and research institutions. I also supported post-event efforts by writing recaps that captured the key research and discussion shared during seminars and event panels, which can be found on the Dahdaleh website. An example of this is the Limits and Responsibilities of Global Health and Humanitarianism, What the Genocide in Gaza Reveals panel. Helping with this event was particularly meaningful because it highlighted how global health intersects with humanitarian crisis, justice, and human rights. I designed an event panelist contact information with visual elements inspired by Palestinian identity and heritage, including the tree's embroidery border and an olive tree symbolism. In the first panel of this series, one of the panelists, Dr. Ahmed Abu Shaban, actually discussed the significance of olive trees as being central to Palestinian identity and symbolizing resilience. As well, this event took place during Ramadan, for which I helped source some Palestinian-grown dates for refreshments. Small details like these help create meaningful spaces for our guests and ensure that they feel respected and comfortable. Being present at these seminars also helped me to learn directly from scholars working in global health. Hearing about real-world challenges and research projects help connect the theories we learn in the classroom with the realities of global health work and the lived experiences of those around the world. For example, I was also able to apply my learning from this panel series into my own research project for the Global Health Research Methods 2 course with Dr. Razavi, where I performed an ethnography on health-related perceptions of Instagram users on the humanitarian crisis occurring in Gaza. Next, one of the big projects that I helped with was organizing resources in the lending library. I helped coordinate the lending or library organization project in January, including collaborating with 2 volunteers to organize books for easier navigation and accessibility. On this note, I would also recommend checking out the lending library. You can explore a wide range of topics, including critical issues in global health, humanitarianism, grassroots development, and planetary health. I have also helped in curating and editing resources for the DI website, such as learning to use WordPress to update the resources page. I also assisted in updating inventory and databases to support the Institute's programs. Overall, as a second-year undergraduate global health student, this role helped me gain insight into diverse fields and research areas. These experiences helped me understand how interdisciplinary global health work is, bringing together people from different academic backgrounds and areas of expertise. For instance, whether it be through Indigenous health, discussions on healthcare systems, or understanding how AMR is expressed in conflicts, I was able to gain a deep appreciation for this role that has allowed me to see what we do in global health and why it truly matters. Apart from that, I was also able to connect with great professors and researchers and gain valuable insights from PhD students whose interesting and thoughtful questions during seminars created an environment for enhanced learning. Lastly, this role and the experiences that came with it motivated me to advocate for and amplify the voices and perspectives of marginalized communities all around the world. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Esha. So similar to before the break, is there anybody that has kind of a question and comment?
What was most rewarding about your experience as a special project assistant?
Yeah, I think, so I was here on Wednesdays and that's when they had the PhD weekly seminars. So I think like getting to create those meaningful spaces and also like play a role in it and just observing and listening to all the questions going around, I think that was really meaningful because I was able to be in that environment and get experiences from it.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's move on. So we have Lisa, who is our next presenter. So Lisa is a third-year global health student as well. Beyond her roles in research, knowledge translation, dissemination, she is a passionate student leader, having co-founded Grow Your Story, a youth health literacy initiative in the GTA. So thank you for taking on that volunteer work as well, Lisa. Over to you.
Apologies for my voice in advance. I didn't catch a cold, so I'm sorry about that. So thank you, Dr. Penny, for that introduction, and thank you to the Dahdaleh Institute for having me here today. Today I'll be presenting on knowledge translation, the science of communication. So who am I? My name is Lisa, and I'm going into my 4th year of the Global Health Program this fall. I'm currently wrapping up my term as a knowledge translation research assistant at the Global Strategy Lab, and I'm a current research assistant and global health intern at the Wellness Impact Lab. So I had the opportunity to work on various knowledge translation projects throughout my time at GSL. And one of the projects that I took leadership on is disseminating the findings from a scoping review by the AMR Policy Accelerator. And this review aimed to analyze the role of gender in antimicrobial resistance. So AMR, or antimicrobial resistance, is when microbes become resistant to antibiotics, making infections difficult or impossible to treat. Some of the key findings from this review is that societal roles and norms dictate exposures to AMR. So this includes women's increased risk through unpaid care work or water fetching, for example. And then also how gender dynamics create barriers in accessing treatments, such as limited financial autonomy for women and stigma surrounding specific infections like UTIs. So now that we have this piece of research, what do we do with it? Knowledge translation, or KT, is all about taking research that's often complex and jargon-filled and turning it into something clear, useful, and practical for the people who can actually use it. So for this specific project, I underwent this particular knowledge dissemination process. So first, we created a simplified script with the researcher, and this was a very iterative process since we were working with the researcher to make sure that they were conveying everything they needed to in the most simplistic manner possible. And then we recorded all of the video clips and later combined them on an editing software, and we edited the video and added visual appeal through graphics. And then we published it along with short form versions of the same content. So I'm going to show you a snippet of the video. If you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to visit our project page, learn a little bit more about the scoping review, or even watch the entire video, you can scan the QR code right on the screen. Oops, great.
Let's dive into some of the key findings from our research. Harmful gender norms, such as valuing boys over girls, can lead to boys having greater access to food and healthcare, leaving women and girls more vulnerable to infections and limited treatment options.
So why did we choose a video to disseminate this information? A video provides the benefits of including visuals, tone, and facial expressions to make the research more accessible and engaging, rather than just reading a long policy document or a complex research paper. And really now more than ever, it also provides a hook for audiences with shorter attention spans. I can definitely say if I'm scrolling through LinkedIn, I would much rather watch a 15-second video than a 15-minute video. So what are my next steps? Before joining the Global Strategy Lab, I didn't really fully understand the importance of knowledge synthesis and knowledge translation and mobilization in research. And this is extremely important since knowledge translation is important for effective communication in research. You can have the most stellar piece of research, you can create an amazing paper, but if you're not able to translate that knowledge and give it to the appropriate audience, then it's not really useful. We can also bridge the gap from theory to practice and directly improve policies, practices, and health outcomes directly, and enhance accessibility and broaden our audience, allowing research to be accessible to members of the general public. You shouldn't need a PhD to know what AMR is or who is more affected by AMR. This should be information that is readily accessible to the public, which is exactly what KT does. And so ultimately, I will leave you all with the quote that knowledge is power, and that's exactly what we're doing at Comms at GSL. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was excellent. Question? Yeah.
I have a question. So did you write a paper first and then translate it into a video?
Yes, so the AMR Policy Accelerator published the scoping review, and once we received the publication, we went ahead with promoting the scoping review and disseminating its contents.
So another question I have is, like, for example, like our scoping review that we have, I think it's very interesting to translate like a research paper into like an accessible, for example, like a video that you mentioned. How can one, like, how did you do that? Like, did you create a video and post it on YouTube? And like, I know that there's like ads that you can create with that video. Like, did you do that to reach a wider audience? Like, how did that process look for you?
Yes. So there's various different platforms that you can use to promote your content. You can use YouTube. YouTube is better. I would recommend shorts rather than long form video content. We do post that for webinars, for example, since those are usually longer, about an hour. But we have performed like analysis on our work and evaluated our work, and we found that when videos are 20 seconds in length, that is when people will tune in more because people generally have lower attention spans. And so when you can hook an audience in 20 seconds, they're more likely to stick through the entire thing. And it really depends on your audience as well. So if you're aiming to target researchers, you'd likely turn to LinkedIn and post on LinkedIn. If you're aiming to target students, for example, you'd probably turn to Instagram or TikTok or another relatable platform that youth would engage in. So it's very dependent on determining what your audience is. And then from that, you can find out which platform would be most appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. The wider discussion will definitely circle back, I'm sure, with more questions for you. Okay, so our final speaker, Kritnaaz, who is a third-year biomedical sciences student at York University and a research assistant also with the Global Strategy Lab. Her work focuses on intersection of science, public health, and policy, with a particular interest in how health behaviors and outcomes vary across global populations. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Penny, for introducing me. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kritnaaz, and I am working as a global legal epidemiology research assistant with the Global Strategy Lab. And today I will be walking you through my work on mapping gender differences in smoking behaviors, which is a global intersectional analysis. And we all are very well aware that tobacco remains one of the major global health issues. And we also are aware that, we have studied gender differences in smoking, and they are very well documented. Research has also examined multiple factors, but the gap is that these factors are mostly studied in isolation. Whereas when we look at it in a deeper fashion, we understand that smoking is mostly driven by the complex behaviors of these factors interacting together. So the question guiding our research was, how do these socioeconomic and sociocultural factors interact to shape gendered smoking behaviors globally? And from a personal perspective, this has definitely been an invaluable experience for me. I was contributing to the validation and analysis process, and I was working across 77 different countries and studying the data sets. And I got to learn a lot more about how research should be conducted and how it is totally, dependent on the context-driven global health understanding of whatever issue you're trying to study. So through this, I developed a much stronger understanding how important the interpretation of global health data is, especially dealing with complex behavioral patterns such as smoking. So to explore this further, we conducted a global intersectional scoping review where we studied 77 different countries across 7 different regions of the world from 1994 up until 2024. And we were mostly focused on understanding multiple variables such as employment, income, the marital status, religious affiliations, education, and the residence where one is residing. And what we did differently here was instead of looking at each of these factors separately, we tried to understand how these factors are interacting and how they are creating a more complex behavioral pattern with respect to smoking as we see it now. And this allowed us to better capture the complexity of smoking behavior across different populations and contexts. So what did we find out? Well, the key findings at a global level, if we try to understand it, was, higher smoking was mostly associated with lower income, lower education, and unemployment. But as we tried to take a deeper dive into this, we understood that it is also very much impacted by the region a person is belonging to and also the gender. For example, for women, smoking behavior was mostly driven by the cultural context or the social norms, whereas for men, it was mostly consistent across regions, and it was also very much structured throughout the globe. And this basically made us understand that it is again reinforcing our idea of understanding how smoking patterns are very much complicated because they are being impacted by all of these socio-cultural and socio-economic factors at a very in a very deeper fashion as we try to understand the implications of all these factors together. So what we try to understand is the key takeaway from this is that traditional approaches usually oversimplify these studies because they are trying to only focus on one single factor at a time. And it is also very important that we try to understand that these smoking behaviors require analyzing how these factors are interacting with each other and thus creating a more complicated and complex smoking pattern at a global level. When it comes to next steps, there is definitely a need to expand sex desegregated and region-specific data sets so that we are able to, focus more
more on region-specific needs, and we are creating more targeted and equitable policy interventions. And ultimately, this kind of approach can help us improve how tobacco control strategies are designed and implemented across different contexts. And to conclude, this project obviously highlights the importance of moving beyond isolated analysis and trying to understand how we can bring all these factors together to understand them and study them as a whole, as they interact with each other to create the smoking behavior that we see them as we see them now. And ultimately, all I want to say is that it's been an incredible experience trying to understand how global health works and how studies are conducted and how context is extremely important when trying to understand such complicated behaviors at a global level. We obviously need to expand our data sets to support policy design. And finally, I would love to thank the incredible team at GLE for guiding me and supporting me throughout the process. And thank you all for your attention, and I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. Any quick questions?
So you were looking at specifically like 3 social determinants: gender, education, income?
No. So we were looking at multiple factors, specifically income, education, employment, if they live in urban areas or rural areas, their marital status, and their religious affiliations. And then we divided all these factors on the basis of gender. So for each gender, we were trying to study each of these factors and then combining them in one table per se. So we're combining it all, compiling
That's
it.
really interesting. Is there like a way to figure out like confounding factors? Like as you did your research, maybe you found like something else that also affected?
For sure. Yeah. I feel like, again, as I mentioned, there were, if somebody belongs to, let's say, a rural area, or maybe if they don't have that much household income. For men, interestingly, that was more likely to reduce their smoking, but for women, that would increase their smoking. That is the pattern we observe. So it's very much variable on the basis of gender, but one factor is more likely to impact the other factor. That is why, we're so much focused on understanding the interaction of these factors rather than studying them in isolation, because they obviously impact each other a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
Great question.
I have a question. I wanted to ask, I have a few questions. I wanted to ask if you also included studies that were done in like Canada or the States.
Yes. So as I mentioned, we were working across 7 different regions. Mm-hmm. So one of our regions was North America, where we were conducting the study on America, USA, and Canada. That was one of the regions. And for both the countries, the patterns were very much consistent. There was not a lot of change.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also learned that like tobacco is something sacred to the indigenous people. So you're not supposed to smoke it. You're supposed to, there's like this whole like practice with it. I've also engaged in that practice as well. And do you think this could also, like it's a review, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, your scope and review could also, is it done? Sorry.
That's actually very interesting. I don't think so. Like, I don't think we were specifically focused on indigenous people. We were mostly focused on on each country in each region to try to understand what the pattern at large is. And the data mostly came from other studies that were conducted, of course, right? So we were extracting the data as a whole from a country in particular, not from a community in the country.
Oh, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah. I'm just saying in terms of like when it's done and it's like, people are going to use it to address policies and whatnot. Yeah. Do you think that your paper could also aid in terms of like addressing what exactly that I mentioned?
I honestly believe that it is not very much focused on that. Mm-hmm. So it will definitely not directly be translated, or because obviously for indigenous people, the laws
there are certain laws depending on the customs and cultures. So it definitely needs to take that into account. But our study is not particularly focused on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other people are looking to get online? Okay, so we can open it up for a discussion. If anybody has any comments or questions for any of our presenters, feel free to jump in.
I have a question. For you, Lisa. Since you showed us a video, are there any other ways aside from writing complex? Well, obviously, when you do write a complex research paper, you ultimately want to translate that into something that's accessible to other people. So aside from a video, did you also think of other, options? I don't know what, but would you know other options aside from videos that you could create?
There are many different options. KT allows you to be very creative. So you can do an infographic, for example, to break down your findings. You can host a webinar and get professionals to kind of discuss it as well. You can write a summarized brief. So sometimes we'll have a policy brief and we'll just write a page summarizing it, very simplistic language. So there's various different ways that you can take. You can, if you have a very creative project, you could even make a play. It's very creative. So you can, depending on your audience, again, that's very important, identifying your audience, and you can tailor and conduct KT in whichever way would target that audience.
Thank you. Sorry, I would like to chime in if that's okay.
Please.
It was one of our meetings with AMR, and I am not a part of AMR, but it was very interesting because, you would look at research and you would think, oh, there are long papers, a lot of data and everything, but they actually ended up creating a story. It's I think it's a comic, right?
Yeah.
It's so incredible. I was looking at it and I was so fascinated, and I still do get fascinated by it because it is so, it's so engaging. You would want to read it. Even kids can understand it. So I feel like that's amazing work being done there.
Yeah. Oh, that's really impressive.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I love looking at those videos on LinkedIn, the short form videos, because I think it's great for attention span. And you talked about different audiences too, specifically for for example, policymakers and all that. But I think my question is when you're disseminating it, within the research process, do you think there's a specific time? Should it be before that you should establish those collaborations with other labs, for example, so that your knowledge, when it does come out, you can disseminate it to a wider audience? Should those collaborations, is there a specific point where you think they should be developed?
Yes, so I'd say the sooner the better, because people get very, very busy and sometimes it gets difficult to reach out to people. People can take longer to respond to your email and reply to you. So the sooner that you do it, the better. So if you're doing a research paper and you know that you're collaborating with another organization, you should reach out to that organization and say, hey, we're looking to do some KT on this. Would you be willing to also do your own KT or possibly share our KT? Another really big thing is having the authors, co-authors, or whoever is involved to also just share whatever you made. So on LinkedIn, they'll just repost what you make into their own network. So that's also a really great way to get a broader audience as well. But I would say the sooner you do it is always better.
I can talk from a researcher perspective as well. I mean, knowledge translation sometimes seems just like a fancy word that researchers have given to basic communication skills, and it's not something we are trained in. So it's really appreciated when there's real skills applied to it, and you can get those skills onto a research project. Good deal. So, lovely. Harvey, yes, please.
Yeah, I'll just follow the trend of the conversation. Yeah, I know attention spans are getting shorter. You hit social media. We know it's changing the brains of younger people. Yet the problems we are dealing with, existential, global warming, what's happening, and how do we get people to go beyond the superficial 20-second sound bites and actually read a paper? How many have actually read a paper from, not just scan the abstract? How many have actually critically thought about it? Because I'm worried about just the superficiality and that we never get to the root issues, the root causes. And so we'll end up just floating along this mass as the climate gets warmer and warmer and unable to really make profound changes. So how do we get beyond? I think we have this huge dilemma.
It's a really good question, and I feel like that is the question that we're always thinking about when doing KT. We find that when we're sending out our newsletters, for example, sometimes people just won't click on the links and they won't read it. So it's really, the challenge is to get people to engage with the content, not just watch the video, but also click on the links that you provide them, click on the study to actually read it. And we find that, certain people will be more inclined to click on the video. So for example, if it's a publication on tobacco, it's very likely tobacco researchers will tune in and they will click on it and watch it and read the study. So I think the challenge is really broadening the audience and making sure that other people are also gaining interest in this topic as well. So me, a university student, I could also read that tobacco paper. It might not intrigue me very much, but I think that's where KT comes in. That's when you make the videos, that's when you do the engagement, and maybe it'll spark some interest in more a broader audience.
Well, my question, I'm not so much concerned getting a broad audience. I'm concerned with getting the audience of people then to go deeper into the issues and not just stay at the quick sound bites. And really get into some profound action, ultimate collective action that we need to address the poly crises that we're in global health. And I'd raise that question for everybody. I think it's a real dilemma we face.
Don't you think? I was just thinking, we like to think sometimes that attention spans have reduced, but I don't think there's probably ever been a time where we've had so much competition for our attention and a direct line to the brain that is our attention. And so, do we have a reduced attention span, or is there just so much competition for our attention that we know there's a video right under this video and a video under that video? And so, yeah, I mean, some YouTube formats, like you were mentioning, like long form YouTube, like long conversations or storytelling, or seems like there's a lot of appetite for that as well. So maybe it's not just our attention span, it's also the thing you're getting at, Harvey, like the platforms and the incentives to compete constantly for our human attention and what impact that has. Yeah, please.
I think that also, there's this, I think it's an Instagram account, and it's like a doctor thing, and they created it's an animation, and it teaches about different parts of the bodies, different issues of the bodies. And the figure in the video swears a lot, and it captures a lot of people's attention to just watch it. Even if you're not interested, I'm not interested in, I don't know, some issues that it talks about, but it's a minute or 2 minute long, and I just watch it because it's entertaining. And I think that maybe could also play into the fact that it's not entertaining enough. And if we, as Lisa said, I think it's really important, knowledge translation is really important, is that the way that we also target audiences, for example, I love nature, and I target videos that really talk about nature and climate change. And I watch those videos, even if it's 10 minutes long or an hour long. Yeah. But if it's a video about, I don't know, something that I'm not interested in, video games, I'm not going to watch it.
Yeah.
But I think it's just really important targeting specific people, because even if we say that we don't have enough attention spans, I will 100% tell you that people do have attention spans. They do have that, but for the things that they actually are passionate about. So I think just really targeting people who are interested in a topic also really matters as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder, I don't know if you have this experience as well. So I might have an interest, say, I don't know, landscaping or something, and I get hooked in on my interest. And then an hour goes by and I don't know where that hour went. And I don't think I was consuming just, like you're saying, it's a random video that is designed, kind of engineered to grab my attention. And I don't realize till afterwards that I'm actually not interested in that at all. And yet I just spent 20 minutes watching it. So that's a really good point too. Yeah, I know it's an important point that you raised, Harvey. It's a collective action problem. It's a social problem. It's a for-profit technology problem. And in the meantime, we are producing research and we would like people to know about it. So we're sort of in this catch-22, right? Yes, please.
With these apps, I feel like a lot of the times they're designed to become addictive, right? Like if it was a 20-minute video, would you spend a lot of time on that app, or would you just watch like 2 videos and you'd be done?
And I'd be done.
So I feel like when it comes to translating that research, maybe not give all the answers. So that way people are forced to kind of like if you leave a cliffhanger there, or they have to go do their additional research or go online and seek more answers because you didn't give it all to them in that 15-minute video, right?
Right. So they might go deeper if they're interested.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Yeah, there was a case, I'm not sure if anybody's following the like evolution of social media, but there was a case in California where there was some accountability for some of these platforms in terms of their harms because of their addictive nature.
And it lawsuit currently.
And that one,
Many apps have actually been designed to be addictive. Like the research they put into making the app was so that you would stay on that.
Yeah. And it's finally being recognized in a court of law, which I think is, to Harvey's point, like this is the starting point, right? Hopefully we can build on it. Yeah. Great conversation as well. Any other comments, questions from folks? Discussions? I had a quick question. Can I jump in? Okay, great. I like to make sure everybody has space to discuss first, but I did have a quick question. Esha, you had mentioned briefly that you were engaged in an ethnography in your talk as well. Can you talk a little bit? I don't know if folks know what an ethnography is. I don't know.
So it's like,
let them know?
Yeah, so it's for Global Health Research Methods 2 course with Dr. Jalilzadeh, and ethnography is basically like an extension of anthropology, but it's like based off culture in social media. So it was just for it was for a course. So the time scope was pretty small. It was like a couple of weeks, but I looked at Instagram users' perceptions on their like knowledge on health related issues in the genocide in Gaza. So I was a thematic analysis, and there was a bunch of themes that I concluded with, and a lot of it was like performative, I guess, like solidarity in a way. But there was some deeper thoughts there, like intergenerational consequences, and people like understood like what was happening, right? So it was more than surface level.
I thought it was an interesting connect to the like kind of knowledge translation, which connects you to these platforms, and then people are actually doing research on the communities that have spring up around these platforms, which is like ethnography is sort of a classic method to investigate that. So I thought that was really interesting. What did you think of the method? Did you think it was interesting or useful?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. I think especially like in this time and age, I think understanding those perspectives is really important. And again, like in knowledge translation, all those reels it was knowledge translation for the situation happening, a real life situation. So through that, we were able to understand and analyze how people were reacting to that.
Yeah. Excellent. And then, Kritnaaz, I was wondering, you were mentioning about how, expand the data, I think was a bullet point. I was just thinking like how much of a heavy lift that bullet point is. In your work, were you coming across any, are people trying to expand the data to be more contextual and include like gender in those things? Or
actually, I'll just give you an example of one of the papers that was very prominently used in our research. So there's this Sri Ramareddy et al. 2015 review. They actually conducted 3 different studies. They published 3 different papers across different regions and multiple countries, and I wouldn't say they had all the factors intertwined or mentioned all together, but they were definitely instead of conducting their research just focusing on one particular factor, they were definitely trying to be more inclusive of multiple factors, and again that was conducted almost 12 years ago, and now that we're here, we're trying to, instead of having 3 different papers on 3 different regions, we're trying to inculcate that in one paper so that it's more accessible to different people. So definitely I feel like we've come a long way, and people have also tried to include been trying to include more factors in one paper, but there's definitely room for improvement always. So we're getting there eventually.
That's great. Excellent. And then Lisa, actually, if you don't mind, I was wondering just one extra question on your use of knowledge translation. You had mentioned you hadn't heard of knowledge translation, or it wasn't like a thing you were exposed to when you first started. Do you leave with like an interest in that because there's kind of like knowledge translation researchers and academics who look at this like theoretically and then in practice, and then there's kind of practitioners, so people who it's their work to help translate evidence and research to useful things. I don't know. Yeah. Do you have any reflections?
Yes. So like you said, before I went into this position, I didn't really know what it was. I'd never really heard of the term knowledge translation. From a very broad scope, I kind of thought it was just marketing, but now I leave knowing it's so much more than just that. It's a very big responsibility because you also want to convey the information correctly. You don't want to lure astray from the research. You want to actually convey what the research is saying, which sometimes is pretty tricky. So I definitely leave with this appreciation for it. And I'm definitely interested in it. I think it's very important. It's something very overlooked, I think, in research, the communications aspect of it. So I definitely leave with an interest, and I'm very happy to have had this opportunity to work with the comms team and Sophia and Demetria. They're amazing communications experts, and they do a lot of good work in the lab.
Has anybody ever thought of, because I know this is something we think of in our research every now and then, is there's that balancing act of there's an audience and attention and needing a hook. Like there's all these like techniques and strategies, and they feel so counter to the research. Like you're actually trying to Harvey's point, like you're actually trying to dive deeply and be a bit more technical and give space, and then promoting that is like almost the opposite of it. And so we've played around with, I give an example in research methods where the sort of university in their efforts to develop a hook kind of misrepresented the study altogether. So I don't know, are there any of those kinds of conversations around like how to find a hook that's accurate, or have things been pretty straightforward so far?
I think a really big thing is working directly with the researchers to make sure that what you're saying is what they want you to say, or the information you're conveying is correct. So at every step of the process, we usually have a researcher who is constantly reviewing everything we're writing, giving us comments, giving us revisions, and just giving us suggestions on like, oh, you said this sentence, but I think this one is more relevant or phrased better. So I think that's really important as well, having the researcher there at every step so that you don't run that risk of potentially saying something that goes against the research, or something very ambiguous that you're claiming that's not necessarily a part of the research.
Great point. Excellent. Hey, any other thoughts or questions from online? From anyone? Well, everyone, I think we are ready to conclude then. Any other thoughts from in the room? Last ideas? Well, let me just thank you all so much, Hanna and Gordane online and everyone in the room. One, for your contributions to the internship over the year and your respective projects. Those who are also doing volunteer work, I cannot believe that you are finding any time or energy to do anything on top of your normal lives. So thank you for any of those contributions as well. And we're just so grateful to have your energy and your excitement and your intelligence and skills applied to here. This is why we do this kind of work in global health, is to hopefully pull folks like yourself in, and we're going to need everybody hands on deck to get through what we need to get through at a global level. So we just appreciate your commitment and your excitement. That makes me, when I do things like that, it makes me feel hopeful and excited about the next 10, 20, 25 years. And we just appreciate it so much. So a round of applause for everyone for their contribution. Thank you so much. And please keep in touch. We want to know what everybody is doing at every moment in the future. And we look forward to seeing what you guys can contribute going forward. And thank you again. And thank you to everyone who came and attended and contributed today as well. We're just so grateful for your thoughts and insights and contributions and questions. Thank you again, and take care.